dressed up like the Sundown Bandit. Nice tits, he thought as she turned sideways, allowing the morning sun to enlighten the front of her shirt, where she had unbuttoned it. The door was open to the sheriff's office, like they were getting ready to transport a prisoner. The woman on horseback was armed with a Colt, and had it trained on the open doorway. Judge Betelgeuse half expected to see two other men come in or out, leading some prisoner in shackles. That would be the routine most of the time, except women dressed up like men on horseback did not transport prisoners. Wait a minute. There's only one prisoner in there, and he's mine. What are they doing? They can't take Jack Jacobs, and they wouldn't either. This was not a prison transport. It was a jailbreak. The noise started up again, and now Betelgeuse saw it was the sheriff's dog standing around the side of the building, barking at the strange woman on horseback. Betelgeuse ran over to the bed and whipped out his own gun. This was no ordinary jailbreak, and that was no ordinary outlaw. Man or woman, that was the Sundown Bandit. And now suddenly Judge Betelgeuse understood the rumors that the Sundown Bandit rode a horse very much like his great strawberry roan that had been stolen by Jack Jacobs and company. There was a connection between the Sundown Bandit and the Silent Shadows gang, brother to Jack Jacobs. Now it was all coming together nicely. His own horse involved in crime. Well, he was going to stop her crime right now. As he took careful aim at the back of the Sundown Bandit's head, he smiled to himself. Oh, people were going to be surprised to see the knockers on this beauty once he knocked her off the horse and killed her dead. But she was wearing the sacraments of her trade, the robes of the bandit himself, herself, whatever. Now then, said the judge, taking aim, be a good girl and don't move. The gun made a terrific sound, and a great flame of blue smoke came lashing out of the end of it. Whatever had been on the other end of his sight picture was now in pieces. It was the strangest sensation that the Sundown Bandit would ever have. Her head had been tilted back moments before the shot rang out, as she was getting ready for a violent sneeze. Had it not been so, the Sundown Bandit would have been in completely different circumstances. As it was, she had her head thrown back, and at that moment she sneezed as hard as she ever could. It sounded like a gun going off. She said, was that me? She sniffed and listened hard. As her head had fallen forward, the round from the gun had gone through her hat and burned her ear a nice lick, like a horsewhip might snap across the ear of a trifling pony. She thought at first it was a horsefly that got her. She hated those things. They bit like a mother. She felt the stinging, however, and smelled the powder, and then she knew. That warn't no horsefly. She fell forward and rolled out of her saddle expertly, shoving her gun skyward towards the direction the blast had come from. That was when she saw Betelgeuse in the window. Smiling, she blasted around in his general direction. She cocked the gun again and let loose another one. 2 rounds went skyward towards the hotel, and one of them snapped the sash above the judge's head, causing him to flinch. The flinch was perfect. Betelgeuse had banged his head on the far side of the window, swearing loudly as he did so. The second round had been meant to kill him, but the Sundown Bandit had missed this time. She was just cocking again, ready for a third blast, ready to splatter his head all over the white front of the Brooksway Hotel, when a sound beside her caused her to flinch. A quick look confirmed her fears. Chatty Dawson had unloaded a round of buckshot at that same window. She had fired at the judge herself. At that moment, the Sundown Bandit realized just how serious Chatty was about helping out. The judge swore loudly and stepped back out of the window. There were smallish pockmarks all along the window sash, and the judge was yelling something. Chatty was staring up at the window, tranced out entirely. Sundown saw this as Jack came running out of the jail, leaping onto Queen's Ride with a practiced leap. He could ride and smell the great early morning out-of-doors for real now, but he wasn't out of the woods yet. The little girl was still staring up at the window. "Chatty Dawson," yelled Betelgeuse down to where she stood. "I see you down in Satan's work, girl. Surrender your soul to me and come quietly." Chatty Dawson freaked. She had been caught. Mama was going to whip her to death. Lord Betelgeuse stood high above her in that window like the death angel himself. She was dead meat. "Chatty," screamed Sundown, "look at me!" But she couldn't. The girl had frozen where she was standing, and she couldn't do a thing. Sundown was surprised to see that she had lost her hat. Chatty's hat had come off, and her hair had given her away. Wonderful. "Chatty Dawson," said Betelgeuse again, "I said come to me, and we can talk about this." "Shut up!" screamed Sundown, as she fired a round through the window of the room above her. She recocked and fired again. "Shut up!" she screamed. Jack Jacobs saw the problem and moved to resolve it. Chatty Dawson had getaway hypnosis. Sundown had about one shot in her pistol left, and then she would be out of firepower. Jack had to move now, while her gun was providing adequate coverage. He leaned forward and kicked Queen's Ride in her ribs as hard as he could. The horse bolted forward, prepared to race out of town. Jack Jacobs leaned down, and as he went by, he grabbed Chatty Dawson by the arm. The shotgun fell out of her hands as if she had been a dead girl, propped up against it, and her eyes were fixed straight ahead as he grabbed her. Sundown, meanwhile, fired off her last shot at the window of the hotel, still cursing a thunderous blue streak at the judge. But the Sundown Bandit wouldn't have time to consider her last shot. Jack had shoved Chatty into her back, and the two horses had taken off together as one towards the end of town. They were moving ahead whether Sundown was ready to go or not. Chatty was fumbling and grabbed for hold. She found purchase in the form of Sundown's coat. She swung off the back of the bandit and almost lost her grip, but she managed to hang tight and bounce off the ground like a small circus performer on a trick pony. Freighter was a massive animal, and mounting him was a job when all the conditions were right. To get upon that massive back was a real challenge when he was moving forward. Jack was riding along beside them now, shoving Chatty against Sundown to make sure she stayed put, and the horses moved together perfectly as one. Once they got to the edge of town, Sundown had her wits back. Both Sundown and Jack grabbed their reins and pulled away from the town. Jack slipped comfortably back into his own saddle as Chatty finally caught on to the back of the bandit and kicked Queen's Ride hard in her ribs to try and catch up with the larger animal. That freighter was certainly a fast steed for all of his size. Queen's Ride would do good to keep up with that animal at all. They rode like the devil himself was after them. After all, he was. Sundown took the lead and dragged Queen's Ride on a merry chase into the woods, seeming to double back for the cabin. Yes, that was where they were going. Jack felt like it anyway. They had come the wrong way out of town, but that would serve to throw the posse off by a good 30 minutes at least. And where, at this hour of the day, was Betelgeuse going to get a posse? He wasn't. Pogues was still in bed, the blighter, and Marklenburg, he would have a big head for the rest of the day. Betelgeuse might try it on his own, but it wasn't likely. The odds would be against him. Now, for the first time in a great while, Jack Jacobs relaxed. It felt good. As he regarded the back of his niece, the Sundown Bandit of all things, and her brave little friend clinging on to her back, tears flooded into his eyes, tears of gratitude. The great smeary streams of sappy liquid rolled off his face, and he was sobbing to himself, flying along behind the Sundown Bandit towards their old hideout. But this was no time for blubbering. He had to think. He had to think what he was going to do now. They rode on now, drawing closer to the cabin on the next set of ridges, closer and closer to that silvery sweet taste of freedom. The taste of freedom was like a cold, tall glass of mountain spring water, fresh out of the ground. Right now, Jack Jacobs was taking in a bellyful. His smile could not be helped. "Thank you, Sundown Bandit, my niece," he thought. "And you too, little Chatty Dawson. Thank you for everything." But he would not be able to tell them that yet for another several miles. Right now he was just practicing how he would deliver those lines. And besides, he still had to get used to the idea that Sunshine Jacobs was the Sundown Bandit. Truth was, certainly, stranger than fiction. Judge Randall C. Betelgeuse walked into the Bouncing Beauty saloon in the heart of River's End, and he stood in the swinging doors of the place, staring at everyone. This act on the part of anyone was always considered hostile, for in the Old West one didn't go into a saloon looking for anyone. A saloon was a watering hole and a friendly place to go. It had to be that way, for people were drinking in these places and gambling. These two elements, nitro and glycerin, were always lying too close together in such taverns and bars. In saloons, a fight was only a booger flick away at any given moment. People came here with that knowledge and tried to live by it. This morning, however, Judge Randall C. Betelgeuse was anything but friendly. As he walked inside and stood there, rudely, in between the two swinging doors, he scanned the room, staring at the people's faces, and making a mental tally of the dudes he saw in the room. All of these people were acting so innocent, and yet 10 minutes before they had all been smashed up against the window of the place, staring out at the flight of the Sundown Bandit, Chatty Dawson, and Jack the condemned man, Jacobs, as they had successfully completed their jailbreak out of the River's End jail. Judge Betelgeuse was not pleased that no one had tried to stop them. "All right," said Betelgeuse. "Now that I have your attention, listen up." Though it was early, the place was pretty full of drunks. No one made a sound. The silence in the place was menacing. Not everyone in here this early was drunk, however. This was also the town's breakfast diner, as well as watering hole, and when a body got tired of eating at the Brooks Way for breakfast, in their continental dining hall, that person would eat at the saloon here for breakfast. "I am Judge Betelgeuse of the Federal Circuit. I'm going to say this once. There was a jailbreak not 10 minutes ago, and the Sundown Bandit was involved. I need a posse right now." No one moved. He hadn't expected that they would. These backwater people were slow to anger, afraid of Judge Betelgeuse, and when push came to shove, not terribly civic-minded either. An escaped prisoner didn't exactly excite them. "Now I know you people are a civic-minded lot," said the judge, "which is why I got $500 right here as up-front reward money for the arrest and capture of the Sundown Bandit and her escapee, Jack Jacobs, as well as a little girl by the name of—" "Begging your pardon," grunted Tater Manley into his pipe bowl. "But did you say a woman, name of the Sundown Bandit?" Betelgeuse looked over in the corner, to where Tater Manley sat with his minions. He was the closest thing the town had to an old man in the furs, but even Pogues himself didn't mess with Tater Manley. Tater was 80 if he was a day, and he was as dry as a popcorn fart without any butter in it. He had a long gray beard, and while he was a single sage of the town, many were the young girls who came to him regularly for advice and, well, lessons. Tater had been the Cupid of the town for years, and he himself was often offered the dainties of some young female who revered Tater as an oracle of information. Tater was the forerunner of one who would be called Dr. Ruth, except he didn't do it in public, like she one day would. He showed these young girls things in private, and they all came away with a new understanding of the female workings and gender. He had taught many women about their own anatomy. Tater often said that if these women had the right relationships with their own mothers, they could have got all that they could have gotten from him from their mothers. Most women did seek him for the knowledge he had, however. He could show them a wonderful thing called female pleasure. In the days before Freud, women didn't have such feelings, except that Scherheit's own possible great-grandfather taught them all about it. She would have claimed him gladly. But Tater never had any kids of his own. He spent his life figuring out the way that woman was built, and how to operate such a device as what they had betwixt their struts. That had been his mission in life, to teach women how their bodies worked. "You old whoremonger," yelled Betelgeuse, "what gives you call to go interrupt me?" Tater stared at him, his steely gray eyes fixed against the side of Betelgeuse's head like barnacles. He spoke with a keel that drove deeper than Betelgeuse. He was older than Betelgeuse, and that was about to come out. "Well," grunted Tater, inspecting his bowl of tobacco, "which'n was this here woman you spoke concerning? I didn't see no woman leaving out of here today." "They were both women, you parasite," said Judge Betelgeuse. "Not that you'd be in any wise fit to deal with either one of 'em." Tater Manley looked around him at the young girls who sat in his court, and the whole place erupted in laughter. For Tater Manley was in the company of 3 mothers and about 4 daughters at this very moment. The old man laughed a deep, rich, hearty laugh, which brought on a slight coughing fit. Getting his wind again, he said to the judge, "And what would I do with her if I was to catch her, Judge? You see the table's full as she sits." "You need to be quiet and let me finish my say," said Betelgeuse rudely. "Son," said Tater, eyes dancing with ancient fire, "son, I caught my first one about 40 years before you was a gleam in your daddy's eye and a stain in his shorts. But what I want to know about this here, woman, as you call them, what 2 rode out of here with your boy this morning, how does one of 'em get to be the Sundown Bandit? Pray tell." "Because the Sundown Bandit is a woman," said Betelgeuse. "That a fact," mused Tater, filling his bowl again. "And I suppose it was she who hit 4 different trains last week in 3 different states." He waited and chuckled at the same instant before he spoke again. "All on the same day." The place erupted again in laughter. Tater was a favorite of everyone in the town, and while no one knew it, he had been watching Miss Chatty Dawson the day she came into town. He had followed her to the jail cell and had watched her talking to Jack Jacobs. He had seen her throw the note over to him. And then he had watched her run out of town and then ride off with a Sundown bandit. Tater Manley had seen it all. He knew that they were planning to get Jack out of jail, and he just wanted to live long enough to see it. Today he had done so. "This here Sundown bandit is quite a busy man," said Tater. "And I hear told now that she's a woman as well. Some feat for one bandit. What say, your honor?" "Thing is," grunted Tater again, "there's more'n one, Judge. Case you don't know that, there is. There's the copycatters out there doing crimes in the name of Billy the Kid, Sundance, the Sundown Bandit, and a host of other vermin likened unto their kind. So you give us $500 to go and bring you back a woman? Well, I have a good deal of problem with that, my man." The place got deathly quiet as Betelgeuse reached for his pistol without thinking. Tater had a bead on him before he could get it from his coat. Tater had a sawed-off double barrel aimed right at the judge's heart before he could do a thing. "Now then," whispered Tater, real low and gravelly, "I see what kind of a fool you really are, Judge Beetjuice. You come in here and you tell us you're looking for a man named Jack Jacobs, who escaped this morning from your cell. Ain't that the same Jack Jacobs you're gonna hang for no good reason?" The place murmured loudly at this and stared hard at the judge. "Go ahead on and get your posse, Judge," said Tater. "I ain't aimin' on stoppin' you. Sundown, man, woman, or beast, is a criminal, and I reckon you got cause to get whoever it is. Sorry I held you up, but I figure that your posse ought to know the truth. Jack Jacobs ain't done jack." He looked around the room and smiled at them. That was their signal, and everyone who wanted to go and get the bandit went with the judge outside into the street. It was about 9 in the morning when Pogues came riding into the town, ready to go with them. Someone had gone to his home and had awakened him. Pogues had initially feared the wrath of Betelgeuse when he saw him, figuring that Betelgeuse would be hot enough to screw over the jailbreak, but he wasn't at all. It would be later that Pogues would hear how Tater Manley had taken all the starch right out of his sails. Betelgeuse was quite ruly and manageable by the time Pogues got to building their posse. "Listen up," roared Betelgeuse as he mounted a horse they had provided for him to go and get the Sundown Bandit. "We'll head out this way and stay with me till we get sight of their tracks. Then we'll spread out on either side of me and comb this place good." No one had lost respect for Betelgeuse as his position of judge, even though Tater had brought him to his literal knees earlier. Tater was an old man everyone loved, but this was a federal judge working as a circuit rider. No one dared say boo to him. He was the highest thing out here next to a governor, or even the president himself. No one would mess with Judge Betelgeuse, except brave old fools like Tater Manley. Tater didn't care, though. Tater would be hitting his 90th birthday soon, just no one knew it. Tater, if he died today, he would still owe God some back time. Tater lived like there was no tomorrow, because for him there was no tomorrow. None that he could count on, anyway. But no one was about to arrest Tater Manley for drawing down on the judge, not even old Betelgeuse himself. The old man would be dead long before the trial came up. "Move out," said Betelgeuse. "Jack Jacobs has a date with Lady Longnoose, and I don't aim to see her get stood up." Chatty Dawson, the Sundown Bandit, and Jack Jacobs were all back at Grandma Mary's barn within the hour. Sundown went at once to water these poor horses. Jack went with Sundown and watered Queen's Ride along with Freighter. They figured maybe 10 minutes was all they could safely stay here, just long enough for everybody to get a nice drink of water and say goodbye. Jack and Sundown worked together well, feeding and watering quickly. Both of their throats were tightening now, and neither of them spoke for emotion. It would be the last day they would ever be together. They both looked up at the same moment and stared at each other hard. They finally got the animals packed from the provisions in the barn. They had just about gotten their heads blown off today, and right about now that was the thing that was weighing heavily upon their minds. Jack would have described the sensation as compared to losing his own virginity, that heavy, oh my God, feeling of what have I done and why. That was what it felt like after a crime. He kept expecting little Chatty Dawson to throw up from fear, but she didn't. "We gotta go," said Sundown. "I want to say something first," said Jack, drawing Sundown close to him, and looking over at Chatty. He motioned her over as well, and together they stood, holding a silent thanks for their lives, and from their escape from the devil, Betelgeuse. "I don't care if you are the Sundown Bandit," he said, kissing Sundown's cheek. "I want to say that there are two women I will always love, and I have the honor, right now, to be holding them both." Chatty started crying. "Chatty," asked Jack, "did I hear Betelgeuse right? Is that your name, child?" Chatty nodded that it was. "Chatty, you are anything but a daughter of the devil. You are an angel of mercy, my sweet." He pulled her close and kissed her on the forehead. Sundown was smiling, tears dangerously close to spilling in her eyes. He kissed Chatty again and then embraced Sundown firmly, holding her tight. They both cried freely now. He whispered thank you in her ear, and then he kissed her on her trembling lips, holding her hand up close to his face. "I will always love you," said Jack. "Thank you," said Sundown, wiping her eyes. "Thank you." Jack sniffed and raised his head to reveal the shining in his own eyes. He looked down the hill towards the town of River's End. He blinked a couple of times and then said, "It's time, girls. I gotta go. I'm going to leave you here and do my absolute best to make sure that it's my tracks they follow, because I can move faster. I'll try and do everything I can to make sure that they don't get you." "You're going back to your ghost town? Is that your plan, Sundown?" "You're headed out for Iron Gulch? Out that way?" Sundown nodded and sniffed again. "I'm going to the cabin a few minutes to see Mary," said Jack. "And then I think Montana. If you ever need me, girls, you're welcome to anything I have, or will ever own, 'cause if it weren't for you, I'd be dead today. What I have now is life. You gave it to me, and I love you both for that. Anything you ever need, Montana, that's the place. You'll find me and Mary there. I'll be sending for her just as soon as it's safe for me." "We know, Jack," said Sundown. "Thank you." He smiled, bit his bottom lip, and thus humbled before the two women, he mounted Queen's Ride and turned once more towards the cabin. "Sunshine," he said, I get this feeling." "Don't," interrupted Sundown. "Don't say it, Uncle Jack. Please. I get it too, and I want you to not say it, and maybe it won't be. Maybe it won't be so." Jack nodded and smiled bitterly. "We always was too psychic for our own good, Sunshine." "Sundown." He winked at her. "Take care, babe." Sundown looked at Chatty, who was tossing her a care package with $350 in it. She walked over to Jack and handed him the money as softly as a nun. He took it and said, "Thank you again." "I will need this, Sunshine," he said. "I might one time have refused it, but I'll need it now. I need you, Sunshine. Stay safe." "Best as I can, Uncle Jack," she said, and it was like the sun actually shining now. Jack regarded her and knitted his eyebrows closely together. "Now I know why Zeke called you Sunshine," he said. "You're as beautiful as the sun shining." Sundown swallowed and said nothing. Her smile was enough for any answer. He was right. Her smile was the sun coming out after a storm, in its intensity. Jack Jacobs rode off towards the cabin now, to stop and say goodbye to his mother, Aunt Mary, to Grandma. He waved back over his shoulder to them. Sundown wiped away a tear. "Well, I guess that we should be on our way, babe. We have a lot to talk about later tonight, don't we?" "Oh," said Chatty, glad it was over, "I reckon we do." They mounted their fully packed horse and left the cabin and the barn for the last time. Neither of them would ever be back here again. But they were just glad that it was over, and while they would be riding swiftly away from here, it wouldn't be swiftly enough. It was just beginning. In the days of the Sundown Bandit, an outlaw was thought to be both devil and a little bit supernatural. A little bit like a ghost. A little bit unreal. Outlaws that would be held in high regard later on, in later years, like Billy the Kid, were looked upon with heavy disdain and fear during their own days. That made them larger than life, and living legends. But outlaws were the fantasies of women that they never wanted to really act out. Outlaws were the things of myth and legend, and best kept there. Outlaws were outside of more than just the law. They were outside of life itself. In the days of Sundown and Chatty, an outlaw was not understood. In the days prior to the Industrial Revolution, when a man's word still meant his very soul, the very fact that a man was an outlaw gave him nothing at all with which to be proud. Even if he could elude capture and death at the end of a rope, that was nothing for which to be proud. This was a crime, same as the felony that had made the criminal an outlaw in the first place. It was called eluding justice. Sundown would have to live with that for the rest of her life. Having been raised in a family of men, Sundown became a man herself. Her ways of outlawing were learned for the most part, but a lot of her talent was hereditary, because she could keep her mouth shut and didn't go bragging in bars and saloons. She became the best of a bad lot. She was literally the best outlaw there could be, for she did the one thing she could do to stay the best in her field. She stayed alive. But every dog has its day, and the Sundown Bandit was no exception. There would come a day when Sundown would slip and let someone like Chatty Dawson take away her finely sharpened edge. There would come a distraction like Chatty to get her killed. Sundown knew this, and she knew it too well. She was doomed to her fate. Chatty was in her future, for better or worse, just like a marriage. They rode hard for about 2 miles south of the cabin, and then they slacked up their pace to allow the horse to rest. It was still a long way to this iron gulch, where Jack had correctly guessed they were going. But Sundown wanted to get there before it got dark. Chatty, she believed, had overcome most of her fear of the bad thing they had done this morning. She was beginning to assimilate the guilt into her soul, like a young woman trying to overcome a rape. Chatty was staring straight ahead and learning to live with the fact that she was now an outlaw, just like the Sundown Bandit. For real. Sundown had not wanted to pry into Chatty's world as they rode off together, away from River's End. She had wanted to reach back and touch the child as they rode. She wanted to say to her that it was all right, that what Chatty Dawson had done as a hostage of the Sundown Bandit would never be used against her. She wanted to hold and to comfort the young woman, but that would be later tonight. For now it was best to leave her inside her own little thoughts and not disturb her. Better if Chatty came out of it all on her own. Sundown, meanwhile, was having guilt thoughts of her own. Thoughts like, what if Chatty had been shot to death today? Thoughts like how she had exposed Chatty to that sort of a possible death. Bad guilt thoughts like these were tormenting her, and she sniffed a fearful tear or two as she led the way to Iron Gulch Pass, just ahead of this young frightened girl who rode behind her. For the rest of the time, until they broke for lunch, nothing was said one to the other. At lunch they saw a nice stream far south of River's End, where there was a low creek bank and a small reddish sand beach, a perfect spot to picnic. They both looked at each other and nodded at the same time. Sundown figured they were about 8 miles to the south of River's End from here, and since they had crossed the stream 2 or 3 times, and now they were eating by the water, she thought they might be safe. If they had tracker dogs, they were all queered up now by their creek jumping. If they just had Sheriff Pogues instead of the tracker dogs, she knew that he'd be stopping for lunch about now anyway. That old boy needed food. For that matter, they all did. Sundown had some cornmeal biscuits, and while Chatty had not seen her packing any of this, she had it all ready to go. Sundown packed food like she breathed, constantly. As an outlaw, she never knew when she might be out here in these sticks, without a thing in the world to munch on. She always had something in her saddlebags. Today she had some things from her uncle's cabin, things that Chatty had not seen her pack away, things like old salted beef taken out of the rafters of the barn while she had been gathering ammunition before the jailbreak. She unwrapped the beef and the bread, and she even had cold coffee in an extra canteen. "You like coffee, Sugarfoot?" asked Sundown, breaking their silence. "Or do you want some water?" "Coffee's fine," she said, smiling up at Sundown, and realized that her silence was hurting Sundown. "Thanks." "You're entirely welcome, doll." "Sundown," asked Chatty, stirring up conversation. Sundown, you ever kill anyone?" Sundown felt like she had had ice water thrown in her face. Now she wished she had left off talking about anything. What a loaded question that was to ask an outlaw. "Yeah," said Sundown. "Might as well get this over with." "Who?" asked Chatty calmly. "Well, I didn't get his name," said Sundown. "I was too busy trying to kill him to find out what he called himself." "Why did you want to kill him?" asked Chatty. "What did he do to you?" Sundown looked straight up towards the heavens and sighed. God would not appear to her as some heavy-duty deity with fire in his eyes and flaming resin for saliva. He would not be upon a throne of judgment, throwing thunderbolts around and kicking sinners in the butt, booting them into a lake of fire. No, he would appear to the Sundown Bandit as a small 14-year-old child, full of these innocent, razor-sharp questions designed to tear through her very soul. God always knew what to send to get your attention and to make you squirm like a hot worm on a frying pan. Sundown looked at Chatty and shook her head. "Well?" asked Chatty, munching her bread and sipping Sundown's canteen of cold coffee, which was pretty good when you were hungry. "Okay, Chatty," said the Sundown Bandit. 4 years ago, 3 lawmen were entering the bank in Missouri City, and they had the misfortune to run into the Sundown Bandit on his way out the door. They were all 3 murdered in cold blood. It wasn't even necessary. But that's what happened. It was a copycat Sundown Bandit, but Chatty, I am responsible for the Sundown Bandit's existence. So yes, I am guilty of murder." "Oh," said Chatty, stunned. She had thrown up the first time she had ever robbed a bank, and she had thrown up 3 times after reading about the killing of these men in her own name. Sundown looked over at Chatty and smiled a sour smile of thank you for reminding me of that. Sundown didn't know if Chatty was attempting to separate herself from the bandit or not, saying, "The bandit has killed and I have not." "Can we talk about something else, Chatty?" asked Sundown. "I did my killing a lifetime ago, and, well, I swore to God this morning that if you lived, I was going to give up killing and robbing for good." Chatty was stunned. "You mean that, don't you?" asked Chatty. "You're really going to turn from being an outlaw?" "I really mean it, Chatty Dawson," said Sundown, her eyes misting over. "I really mean it." Chatty seemed pleased with that, very pleased. It was like that she was the cause of the bandit's reformation, and that was not far from the truth. Little Chatty Dawson, the girl who never pleased any of the women in her family, had pleased a woman who was known as the Terror of the West. The Louisiana Purchase would never know how much one little girl had done to free it of the scourge known as the Sundown Bandit. Before Chatty Dawson, Sundown was hitting a train a week for many years, and a bank a month at least. She always got away with loads of cash, and the copycat Sundown Bandits, like children dressed up as their favorite thing on Halloween, had made her name known far and wide. The manila riding coat, the black Stetson, the blue bandana, the Colt .45. All told, the Sundown Bandits had gotten several $1,000,000 of ill-gotten gain between them. Of course, none of them knew the others, and only the one was the original. But had anyone suspected that the real Sundown Bandit had been a woman, there would have never been the first Sundown Bandit copycat in the first place. The copycatters all had one thing in common. They were introverts living the bad glory of someone else. It was a form of warped hero worship. the fan adulation of an idol. Sundown knew there were copycatters out there mimicking her, and she had always been a trifle proud of this. That was until a 14-year-old girl had come into her life and had made the Sundown Bandit want to be like her, instead of making Chatty Dawson a career criminal. Here little Chatty had done a jailbreak today, and she was no closer to career crime than Sheriff Pogues would have been. This had impressed Sundown as much as anything, because she had always thought that her daddy had made her a career criminal. He had planted the bad seed in her. It had never dawned on her that she could stop any time she wanted to. But Chatty had shown her that she could stop, and right now. Sundown was becoming literally entranced with Chatty Dawson. She was not stained with the Sundown Bandit, as the bandit had been stained by her father. Chatty could say no any time she wished and be gone. Judge Betelgeuse could no more prove that Chatty had broken Jack Jacobs out of the jail today than he could prove the existence of Jesus Christ to a room of atheists. He knew in his heart that that was true, but he could not prove she did it. He would have to have caught her today in order to have placed her at the scene. There would never be a court of law to convict Chatty Dawson of anything she had done while in the company of the Sundown Bandit. "Sundown?" asked Chatty softly. "Yes, Sugarfoot," answered Sundown, looking at her. Chatty was idly drawing in the dirt with her finger when she said what she would say. "Sundown," repeated Chatty, drawing in the dirt, "I just wanted you to know I forgive you for whatever you did as the bandit. I forgive you, Sundown, if nobody else ever does. I love you." Sundown could not see her hand in front of her face for the tears that flowed. She had never cried this way before in her life. Sundown tried to reason with herself. "This is just a little girl. She cannot forgive your sins. What is the matter with you? Get a grip. Sure, it's sweet what she said, but don't go nuts over it. It means nothing." But she didn't believe a word of that. Chatty Dawson might as well have been Jesus himself, sitting there, telling her it was cool, she was clean of her sin, drawing in the dirt with his finger, as he had done when he forgave the whore of her adultery. Her face shone like the sun as she looked at Sundown's repentance running down her face, and Sundown did feel cleansed. She really did feel an awful burden had been lifted from her, like a great black bat's wing lifting off her body. She felt as pure as the day she had been born to a mother she would never know. "Go and sin no more." "Thank you, Chatty Dawson," whispered Sundown, "my own sweet angel of light. Thank you. And a little child shall lead them." For if she didn't accept her gift of forgiveness as a little child, from a little child, she would in no wise receive it at all. Judge Betelgeuse, however, was not feeling so merciful this morning. Not at all. As the day wore on, he felt even worse. Just as Sundown had predicted, Pogues had wanted to stop for lunch, and a big one at that. It was his wife who packed an enormous picnic for the posse. They could have fed an army for days on what all she had packed for them to eat. They were 3 miles from the Sundown Bandit and Chatty Dawson when they stopped to put their feet in the same river and cool their collective heels. Sundown and Chatty remounted their horse and headed on for Iron Gulch. widening the gap between the posse and themselves. "Ooh-wee," said Pogues, reveling in the Indian summer heat. "Sure does feel so good to dip my dogs in here. Ooh, that is nice." But Elgus did not answer him. He was furious with them for stopping to make a church social out of his posse run. Fried chicken was everywhere, and even a few had tablecloth ground covers. "Deliver me from small towns," thought the judge, taking a nip out of his flask of whiskey to stifle the approaching headache. He sighed at them all. Now he knew how Moses must have felt with the children of Israel. Here God Almighty is giving them a guided tour of the desert, and all they want to know is, when do we eat? Fools, he sniffed and sipped again at his flask. They didn't want to catch the Sundown Bandit. They wanted to eat. But Helgus decided to rest until they had had their fill. They could still catch the fleeing outlaws, and maybe he could take little Miss Dawson aside for a little, forgiveness of his own. He smiled. He had not had a virgin since he was in England, and had bought an 8-year-old girl for an hour. That had been a thrill and a half. Chatty Dawson would more than make up for the wench, to whom he had paid $50 this morning. He must have really been in a fog to offer her that kind of money for silence. But he had been scared for some odd reason. Maybe something in the drug she had slipped him. Something had made him paranoid as anything. That was why he figured he had missed the Sundown Bandit's head this morning when he shot at it. He was fuzz-headed on laudanum, maybe. The paranoia and the hangover effect told him he had had an overdose of some rather potent medicine. But the one thing he was keeping to himself was the fact that he now knew that the Sundown Bandit was really a woman. When she had turned around, the morning sun shining through her shirt, well, it left no room for mistake. Those were the finest set of melons he had seen in a while, even on a dirty old outlaw. He was still trying to come to grips with the fact that the Sundown Bandit had a nice set of knockers. But now he tried to think of Chatty to ease his mind. Chatty would feel so good, especially when she started crying. They all did that. He would merely take her aside, once he had caught up to her, and tell her that if she allowed him to punish her, she would not be charged with the crime of jailbreak. She would have no choice but to submit herself to his riding crop. But Helgus felt light-headed with pleasure. He would have her and good. Precocious as she was, it was no more than she deserved. But Helgus took a deep breath and smiled. Though he was surrounded by fools, eating and drinking and laughing, he closed his eyes in his private reverie. Soon he would be laughing, and maybe he would string Sundown up in front of Chatty to make her scared of the rope. If he did that, then anything else he did to Chatty Dawson would seem like a piece of cake to endure by comparison. Jack Jacobs was furious. But Helgus had gone the wrong way. He had watched as the posse went up towards the cabin, and then had gone down river after Sundown and Chatty. Mary had been hiding in the cabin and had not come to the door. They figured that no one was home, since there weren't any horses in the barn. Now Jack was tracking the posse. He hadn't decided to go to Montana just yet, after all. He had chuckled to himself when he saw them stop and get out their picnic supplies. If only Iron Gulch had been farther away from the edge of the river, he would not have worried about Sundown and Chatty at all. If only that were so, he could just turn around and go north on his own. But now he would have to risk capture himself to save them. But he would do it, or die trying. His plan was simple. He would wait until they got either too close to Sundown and Chatty, or he would wait until they got tired and wanted to turn back. Then he would give them a reason. He would allow himself to be seen, and excite them with the prospect of at least one capture for the day, and he would ride them all the way back to River's End as fast as old Queen's Ride here could take them. That was his plan. He knew where Sundown and Chatty were. He had already spied upon them by the bank of the river, 3 miles below here. Sundown was slipping. She hadn't heard him as he crept up through the bushes. She had been crying, of all things. Whatever, he thought. He had almost made himself known to them to warn them away. He would have, only at that point they were breaking up camp and did it on their own. He decided to let them go on. Good girls, he had smiled. He said a little prayer for them as well, something he had never done before. But maybe the God that was would save Chatty, and thereby save his niece in the bargain. Hopefully. It was now afternoon, and if they hadn't turned back by 3 o'clock, he would interrupt them in their pursuit of Sundown and Chatty Dawson. Jack rode discreetly behind them, watching them, engaging their speed mentally, to make sure there was a clear margin away from the 2 women they were pursuing. There had to be that margin, or else he would interfere immediately and lead them astray. He had been following them now for about an hour, when suddenly he realized that they might catch Chatty and Sundown at the present rate they were going. They wanted to check out Iron Gulch, he overheard one of them say. Great, a town deserted for years, and suddenly they want to check it out. He was listening as one of them was talking to Betelgeuse, who was nodding his head slowly up and down. Yep, that was where they were headed. And then come back to town if they didn't find them there. Now it was official. Crap, that would never do. That was exactly where Sundown and Chatty would be going. He took a deep breath and plotted how to do this. Riding discreetly around the group of riders, he made his way ahead of them. He was maybe 5 minutes ahead of them now, and he stopped to let his horse rest a moment. Then he got out his big ball of twine and started to work. This was simply the neatest trick in the book, if it wasn't the oldest. He smiled to think of what it would do towards buying him some time. He decided that they would come through this bit of clearing here, and then head down to the river once again. The river along the shore had a bad bunch of briars along the way through here, and this ridge would be quicker to travel once they got past the briar bushes. Sundown and Chatty had come this way, he was sure, and yes, now he did see the slight signs of their tracks. He had about 3 minutes to set this up. He went about halfway down the hill and started stringing the twine along the ground between 2 trees across the path. He set the string line about 2 feet off the ground, and he ran it across the wide path formed by the cleared area, where naught but pine needles lay. Perfect. Once he had the trip line tight and tied off, He went back and forth with the ball until the string line was 15 or 20 strings strong. That would be enough to trip any horse alive, especially at high speed. He had just finished and tied off the line when he heard them coming. He wrapped the rest of the string up, and he led his horse to the river's edge, just below the trip line. Mounting his horse, he went across the river carefully. It was only 3 feet deep here, but he was careful none the less. He made it to the other side and turned his mount around to watch the fun. Now he got off the horse and stood in broad daylight, in plain sight. He waited for them to see him loitering here. He smiled as the first ones came into view. They did not appear to notice him at all. Lord, they were an unobservant bunch. He waited till they were all in sight of him, and had started down the hillside to the river. This would not do, he fumed to himself. They had to be running after him for the tripwire to work. Look at me, you idiots. They didn't look up at all. They were chit-chatting amongst themselves like a bunch of old women. "Hey!" he yelled out in frustration. "Look at me, you stupid bunch of morons! I swear my mother tracks better than you." They looked. They stopped dead in their tracks, and they looked. Their mouths fell open, and they sat there, waiting for eternity to open up and swallow them whole. Jack was staring at them himself, in awe. He had never seen people this stupid. "What's your problem? I give you tracks, and you just wallow over top of them. I give you signs, and you just ignore them. Is this a posse, or are you all just enjoying a day out in the woods? It's enough to confuse a fugitive, I swear. I want a piece of that chicken you all been sucking your fingers over, since it's obvious you aren't chasing me any more." They sat there just staring at him. Jack Jacobs became angry. "I was the one in your jail," he said. "Come on and get me." He decided to watch the trip scene. As they rushed after him down the hill towards the river, he decided to wait on it. Normally the escaping criminal would not stay and watch. He'd be too busy gaining ground. But these poor fools would be the next hour and a half getting remounted and ready to chase him across the river. Then the 3 feet of water would probably stop most of them. He didn't want to risk losing them. They might just go on back to Iron Gulch out of sheer stupidity. They raced down the hill now towards the river, and just as they reached the bottom of the forest, about halfway down the hill, they caught their horses' hooves in the trip lines, and they all went over, head over heels, like a child's toy soldiers falling out of an open box. Jack Jacobs laughed his fool head off at them. They were a massive cluster of horse legs, hats, and waving arms. It had to have been the funniest thing he had ever seen in his life. He laughed and laughed and laughed at them. The trip line worked better than he had planned, however. As the men got up to get remounted, 3 of the horses had broken legs. Wonderful. He hadn't counted on that. He hadn't wanted to damage anything but their pride. Just to teach them a lesson. The shots rang out as these horses were put out of their collective miseries. 2 of the men had broken limbs as well. "Well, you're all lame," Jack's mind screamed at them. "You're all so lame you can't find your way back home again. I'll have to show you where that is." One of the men was not getting up too quickly. Now Jack felt guilt all at once. Great, he thought. You poor fools. He should not have done this, but it was his job. As an outlaw, These same fools were going to see you hanged, Jack. They were coming after you as part of Betelgeuse's posse, to hunt you down and kill you like a dog. This is exactly what they deserve." He still hated the idea of hurting anyone. He stood now waiting for them to get up. Poor idiots. Jack lit a cigarette and shook his head at them. He sighed. He waited and closed his eyes. He almost lost his life doing that. From high up on the ridge, one of the riders had not followed the group down the hill. One of them had seen the trip line, and had apparently known about it. That man was now aiming his Winchester repeating rifle at Jack Jacobs's head, and whipping off rounds at him like mad. Of course it was Betelgeuse. The first 2 rounds missed Jack Jacobs. The third one struck his right leg. He felt little pain, and later would discover that it only grazed him. He got out of sight lickety-split as the 4th round hammered into the ground in front of him. His horse had bolted up the hill, and it was a good thing, too. If Betelgeuse had thought to kill his horse first, they would have caught him on foot about 3 miles from here, and they would not have been happy about seeing him again after this. He scrambled up the hillside as rounds popped the earth within inches of him. He got hit again in the left buttock. The round deflected off his butt and stung him deeply as it snapped a twig by his head. He winced and charged on up the hill, out of sight. He grabbed his butt, and his hand came away bloodied. Ouch! He closed his eyes as another round snapped against his boot. Sodom and Gomorrah! He could see Betelgeuse, but how he could see him that well behind this foliage was not known. His boot was damaged, but again it was nothing fatal. The toe leather had been shot off, and the metal plate beneath it was visible. He found and mounted his horse, who was only too glad to get out of here as quickly as she could tote her rider. Forget waiting for them now. He had to move, for back behind him there was one old experienced tracker in the bunch, and that man was Betelgeuse. He really was the devil. As Jack Jacobs worked his way back up the river's direction, leading a trail towards River's End, he wondered about Betelgeuse. An evil wind went through him as he thought of what had happened back there at the river. A chilling, evil wind. Betelgeuse might have known about the trip line all along. Only he had stayed up on the ridge alone. Why? Why had he not followed his men down the hill and been involved? Was he sitting up there waiting for the trip line to take its victims?